Hello, my name is Scott Daspin. I'm with Triad Securities. I'm a partner of North Capital. Triad Securities works in actually traditional custody clearing and trading on an introduced basis. And in the last year or two, we've rebuilt and started issuing private placements, hence working with North Capital, which has been a great platform for us. Today, we're going to be speaking about the emergence of STOs, aka security tokens, and the rebirth of ATSs, which is alternative exchanges. So we're going to just go to my left and have everyone introduce themselves to start.
Sure.
Sarah?
I'm Sarah Borzan. I'm a principal and director of business development for North Capital. I work with platforms, so any of our partnerships I help onboard as well as help oversee the technology for our firm.
My name is Evan Malanga. I'm a principal at Consensus Digital Securities, focusing on private placements and security token offerings.
My name is Jared Reddick. I'm on the business development team at Dark Matter. We're an online platform for capital raising in the alternative fund space, so we directly match LPs and GPs.
I'm Lance Peterson, CEO of Marco Technologies. Marco is it's an end-to-end capital formation and investor management platform for traditional and tokenized securities. It's basically for issuers managing their investors.
We'll start off pretty simple. Since security tokens is actually fairly new, I just wanted to kind of get a sense from everybody. When did you first learn of a security token, and have you issued any security tokens?
So I learned of a security token probably about a year and a half ago. Crypto, obviously, before that. We haven't issued, North Capital hasn't issued any tokens, but we've been involved in different token offerings.
I first started paying attention to this space regarding securities around January of this year, right before my employment began at Consensus. And then as far as issuing a security token, not yet, but we are close to closing our first deal here shortly. So,
Congratulations.
And I first learned about security tokens about a year ago. And kind of what brought me to the security token space was when I was really trying to figure out the difference between a security token and a utility token. Looking at where does the value accrue in these ecosystems, and it became apparent that utility tokens, they're not actually equity ownership in a company. And so when I started learning about security tokens and realizing that you could actually have equity ownership in something, whether it be an asset or a fund or a security, and actually trade that on a blockchain. So I started to learn about the difference between the two classifications.
Yeah, I think for me it was probably a year and a half ago when Blockchain Capital, tokenized, I think it was $10 million worth of, one of their funds was kind of the first ones that I saw that did it, and kind of been following it ever since. And obviously with the ICO boom, and then watching the SEC kind of throw the hammer down, you saw it coming. So.
Got it. So I actually want to take a step back, an unapproved question that I reviewed with you guys.
Off script.
What?
You're off script.
I'm off script now.
Off script already.
But a lot of names have been generated in the last 12 months to kind of align with the securities industry. But what is a security token? I look at it as a little bit differently, but I just would love to hear what you say, and I'll try to chime in at the end. Sarah, or anyone can answer this one. Do you want to start, Sarah?
Yeah, sure. So a security token is really a share or equity in a company represented by a token. It really works like equity or any other securities instrument. The difference is it's represented by, someone's ownership is represented by a token. And that's where there obviously is some disagreement kind of in the space. So maybe I'm not the best person to define it. That's half the problem, it seems.
I agree with you. I don't think there's any difference between a security token and a security. I just think the difference is a smart contract is sending information differently than maybe on paper or a transfer agent.
Yeah, it's kind of just like a wrapper, I guess, of a traditional security. For example, a utility token, to be a true utility token, you have to think of it as like a commodity that has no ownership properties. A security token has some sort of ownership properties. So whether it being like an equity holder, like you get all the residual income. So a security token has some ownership properties, where a utility token is purely used for only utility on a blockchain.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. Like to my comment about the ICO stuff, I guess the whole time for me, I'm looking at it like these don't, the Howey test exists, and of course the fact that everyone's investing these, they're speculating, assuming that these are going to go up in value, and the fact that they don't have any current utility kind of made them all securities. So to me, I'm more like, it was more like Jay Clayton, where it's like I hadn't seen one that I didn't think was a security, right? So, but of course, that's where the nuance comes in, and it's more about how you handle that.
Right.
I'm not like, everything's got to be a security, because clearly
Right.
utility tokens have a place, and of course, as it pertains to blockchain, that's a really big part of kind of how the whole thing works and why it's so
Right.
cool.
So what's interesting is very similar, but also very different. We heard ownership or revenue, share, maybe not a share. So security tokens really hasn't really defined its thing, but what was defined was the regulators said, this is a security. And then token kind of got tied into with utility tokens, which we're not talking about today. But what I've been calling them is more digitized investments. So it's is really more of probably in the last, I would say earlier this year, I was saying token, security token. We went from looking at securities. People were just doing filings for a utility token. I'm like, not going to fly. And then I said, we're going to now do a security registration for potentially a utility where you get a rev share. I'm like, you know what, in my opinion, investors don't want that. And then it just all boiled right back down to the beginning, equity ownership in something that's been digitized. That's kind of what I'm seeing. So anyone that has touched on the STOs or digitized private placements, has it been easier, or has it higher valuations helped issuers with the tokenization or digitization of assets?
I wouldn't say easier. I mean, easier to raise money, sure, but I think a lot of that has been investors, and I think this is why we've seen a little bit of a decline, is investors didn't really know what they were investing in. And as there has been a lot of news and media around around fraud, around regulatory bodies kind of weighing in, investors go, oh, maybe I should look at this a little bit differently. So I think there's not like the rush, the gold rush, if you will, that we saw before. As far as tokenized offerings, we haven't seen a lot. Are they easy? I'd say they're very much the same as any offering as far as a broker-dealer or North Capital's role, in that how we vet an investor, how we vet the company, how we vet their valuation and take that into account. So when you add the word token or coin or anything like that, the level of risk for us goes up. So in that sense, I would say that it makes it a little more complicated.
Yeah, I agree with Sarah. So kind of from our side, what we've seen in the tokenized space is that we're now seeing funds, so alternative funds that are looking to tokenize actually LP interests and creating kind of a secondary market for an LP interest in a traditional alternative fund. So it could be a hedge fund investing traditional stocks, but they're tokenizing that LP interest. And so I don't think that it makes it easier, but because it's still the same underlying product. You're still an owner of that fund, but I think it does create, opens the market up to a new LP base that might not have heard about that fund, or may not have had any interest in it too. And for a perfect example would be, say someone, I guess a Bitcoin whale, if you will, someone that they bought Bitcoin in 2010, they're worth $100 million now, and that's 100% of their net worth, but they realize they need to diversify that net worth into more traditional assets. It's very hard to move $100 million of Bitcoin. So if you had a tokenized fund offering where you could do some sort of an exchange Bitcoin for ownership in a traditional equity hedge fund, that might be attractive to that LP that may not have never invested into a traditional hedge fund in the past.
I mean, based on what I've been hearing, is that most of these people who are doing STOs right now are having a really hard time raising capital. Yeah. So like it's slow going, because the number of Bitcoin whales that totally get it, it's just like the population is just super small, and all the people that have the money are like, I don't get it. What's the difference between a utility token and a security token? I don't get any of this stuff. Can I just invest in, can you just make it regular how it used to be? And then maybe talk about like tokenizing it later once I get my mind wrapped around this. So I think that it's right.
I mean, that's exactly what we faced in our live transaction now. You say a security token, you go to the crypto world, and the crypto world's like, well, ETH's below 200, so I'm not liquidating this to invest in your deal. And then you go to the institutional world and say, hey, we've got this really cool deal. And they're like, oh, you said token? Not interested.
Where would I custody? Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm seeing
very
very
true.
similar things. So jumping to Evan on this question, before we move off security tokens, can you talk about what that means to tokenize or digitize, like the actual mechanics of creating these smart contracts?
Yeah, so I'm not a developer, so to caveat, I don't know how to actually code, but to walk you through kind of what we're seeing and what we're doing at Consensus. So to start, we're trying to look through the various types of ERC tokens. You got ERC20, 721, all this stuff. And right now, throughout...
Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you just explain what that is?
Okay, so in a brief nutshell, the ERC is like the type of token. So an ERC20, for example, is just the most common, generic, most customizable standard of token. A 721, for example, is non-fungible, where each token is different from any other token. They can't be traded. It's like a very unique asset. And it's just Solidity, which is Ethereum code writers that create these smart contracts. And so we're taking that as a framework and seeing which type of ERC tokens we can apply to creating a security token. And right now, the closest thing that I think is feasible to this is one of two, the ERC20 or the ERC 1400. And the problem with the ERC 1400 is it just was released and it's really just in a concept stage, but it's going through thinking through transfer restrictions, things like if there was a legal action and supplier demand had to be, or demand of the total supply of tokens needed to be increased or decreased, if there's treasury stock, all these different things that happen with an equity security is kind of all laid into that, but it's not actually functioning yet. It's still in proof of concept stage. So that brings us back to the ERC20. And so for that, in order to do that for example, our transaction that we're doing now, we have to just get a full list of requirements that are going to go into the terms of that deal. So obviously it's a Reg D offering, so you have a 12-month lockup. So you're going to embed that into the smart contract, for example, and all the other types of things that are going into that deal. But the problem with it, why it's not perfect, is that with an ERC20 token, you're going to develop that up front and put all that stuff in, and once that contract's deployed, it can never be changed. So exactly, it's immutable. So right now, there's no perfect solution. We're hoping the 1400 version will get us closer to that, but we're working closely to start defining some of these terms in terms of the actual smart contracts of the tokens.
Yeah, 'cause the big difference now is that regular, like a cryptocurrency that uses the ERC20, you can transfer it. I can send it from me to you, and once I hit send, it's gone and it can go there because I told it to. Whereas when it's a security token, there has to be some regulator in between that says, wait a minute, first of all, am I allowed to send this to him? No, it's a 12-month lockup, rule 144, you're only in month 9, you can't do it. And then on the flip side is that it needs to say, well, this address that I'm sending it to him, it has to go and look and make sure that he's an accredited investor, or this isn't going to be the 101st investor in the deal or whatever, all of those, the regulatory rails. So it's a completely different ballgame, and like you said, the ERC20 wasn't developed out of the box for that. Now the 1400 might be the solution.
Exactly, but it's the most customizable, which is why we're able to use it. But once you hit send, you can't go back.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you can't change the rules.
Again, off script, sorry. Not to get over technical here, but I've been curious, and I'm sure many people in the room aren't familiar with the immutable aspect of blockchain, but can anyone explain why it's immutable? Why can't it be changed? I mean, why can't you use whiteout? Why can't you use eraser? Why can't you go in a hack? What makes it immutable?
Well, I mean, because when it's written, then the miners, they pick it up, they mine it, and it goes into a block, and that's the whole point. Then another block is written, and now the consensus is reached amongst all of the nodes on the network, and you can't change it. Yeah. I mean, it's like that's like the simplest definition of what blockchain's doing, right? It's block by block by block, and you can't go back and say, "Ooh, I made a mistake. I got to do that." So there's no amend or that doesn't exist. So
yeah, each block is built on the prior block, and so basically all the information from the prior block is kind of the foundation of the next block. And so if you were to try to change a transaction, you would actually, and so when you get to so for example, just as Bitcoin was the first blockchain, it's every 10 minutes a new block is created. So if you an hour from now, there's 6 blocks that you'd have to go back and change. And by that time, it's completely impossible.
I opened the Pandora's box here. If you guys want to know,
We should probably just stop
if
there.
anyone cares to know about immutable and blocks and how blockchain, I think you were very close. I mean, but it's that would be a whole day in itself.
Yeah, right.
But what we touched upon when we were talking about creating contracts and writing code on certain blockchains, Sarah, what happens, what's necessary when you're dealing with FINRA or the SEC and regulations? So it sounds like we're in a world where, I believe we're in a world that's, everything's been created. Now we have a new world that was created away from regulators. Mm-hmm. So how did you tie, or how does North Capital tie these regulations into the new technology so we all stay compliant?
I would say the first thing is that the rules do exist, especially as it relates to primary issuances. There's an issuer's exemption, the investors have to be qualified, and I understand that, you know, a key component with a tokenized offering is liquidity and trading, so that's where when you say, okay, you know, what rules and how do you stay compliant with the regulations? Well, you stay compliant with the regulations. You don't allow trading, you know, within that first year. So now, kind of going back to with what Lance was saying, I think that's the issue with smart contracts is sure you can program, okay, you can't trade for a year, and let's say that, you know, we have a token to validate someone's accreditation and we can validate that we know their identity. But now let's say, you know, a developer at North Capital or at, you know, whatever firm didn't code it right. Someone steals the security, and what do you think they're gonna do? Oops, sorry, that was our developer. I mean, someone has to be on the hook for protecting and providing kind of a good control location for those securities. And so that's why, as we look into secondary trading, the importance of, and actually I'll step back and say, when we're talking about good control, I think that's the part that's not defined. That's the part where we're trying to get clarity, is say, okay, now instead of book entry and on a ledger, now an investor has a token. And what happens if, you know, someone dies? Or what if I lose my private key? How do you maintain that good control location? And I think that's the problem that has to be solved in order to be able to really scale this space.
Yeah, and I think that, and that's just it. Like I think Jim alluded to it, right? Like it's like you can't jump straight from where we are to like this new you know paradigm sort of thing. Like this shift has to take place, because the way I see it is that you're going to have off-chain book entry. You know, you have to keep track of who has these securities. The beauty of it is the fact that it's interoperable, right? Hence ERC20, ERC, like, and it can trade, and we've got decentralized things, and like that's what makes it cool. But that's just a representation that makes it easier to trade hands from me to you without it being a total pain in the ass. You know, I think that's kind of where we're at right now.
I think just to add on to that, something I think that's exciting if you look at it like in the big picture is if you look at the private security space 6 years ago to where it is today. I mean, the number of transactions that we as a firm have done, we never could have done before the Jobs Act, before e-signing was accepted by the regulators, before KYC was automated. So you look at the progress the space has made, and now you look at, there's kind of this common infrastructure for a lot of the big players to buy into for how we can create kind of a more liquid market, utilizing the regulations to create liquidity, transparency, and I think that's what's exciting. So the big, I mean, that's kind of against the idea of let's decentralize, you know, the private securities market. Right, but if you look at how it's done today, actually, that's pretty significant.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So moving along, we went from creating a security token, digitizing a private placement, et cetera, to talking about regulations. I just want to move, before we get to the ATS, I want to mention post-issuance, what's important. So Lance, you had some comments on what you do on the post-issuance side.
Yeah, I mean, because if they are securities, and that means that it's on someone's, you know, balance sheet someplace, it's equity or it's some liability, you know, the IRS certainly cares about who's getting capital gains or income on dividends and things like that. So you've got tax reporting that you have to worry about. and just once again, keeping track of kind of that transfer agent functionality. Because if it is, I mean, the beauty of the fact that you transfer me to you, like someone is regulating, it knows who they are. So even if they did steal the token, once again, you kind of know, you have to know who it went to. I don't think that's as much of an issue with security tokens, but it's just more about the fact you can't lose track of your cap table. Right, and once again, the IRS isn't going to take it as like, well, sorry, it was decentralized and on the blockchain, and we have no idea who we were sending these dividends to, and they're just going to be like, not cool, right? Like, that's your responsibility. That's problematic. So that stuff isn't, not to mention just the dividends and distributions and people not wanting like in crypto, and they're going to want it in fiat, just like they do today. I want a check. No, I want an ACH. I want a wire. I want it in a different currency. So those sorts of things.
So you bring up some good points, and I should have maybe mentioned this earlier, but I'm assuming North Capital can do everything that we're talking about here, but what technology are each of you using to handle whether it's tokenization, whether it's post-issuance, whether it's keeping track of cap tables? So we're going to go down the line. You can brag. Actually, we'll finish with Sarah last. Let's start with Lance and come down to Sarah. What technology do you use, including North and outside of North, that helps you do all this?
Yeah, so we use North, but we've built our own platform on top of it to which has DocuSign integration and things like that. So it's all built by ourselves to support all of that, along with some third-party partners like Transact API, North Capital.
Yeah, it's the exact same for us. We, like, as a platform, that's kind of our core business. So we have built the technology to offer these opportunities online. We are kind of doing a blockchain project as well, and so trying to figure out smart contracts and trying to figure out how we can code, especially the subscription documents, which is a very a painful part of the investment process of a private placement. So figuring out how we can, much like Evan's doing, figuring out how we can incorporate smart contracts into converting subscription documents. And of course, we use North Capital as kind of our the person we bounce all our ideas off of, especially on the regulatory side.
So for us, we use North Cap's Transact API, but for those developers who are actually writing and minting the tokens, we have our own Solidity and Ethereum developers and Consensus that are working on that, on that code and all that stuff.
I think we covered you already, right? So, okay, so I had some questions here that might not be relevant, unfortunately, but since we are only first touching security tokens, our first issuances, and we're all within the first year, I wanted to bring up ATSs. So no one's listed anything, right? Has anyone transacted in a compliant manner on an early stage anything? Okay, so.
You all better say no.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's just talk about what your what are your plans to be able to offer liquidity on something that's been digitized or tokenized with an ATS that you have built or not built or just any comments around ATSs? We'll just go left, Sarah, starting.
Sure. So part of our vision and what we're taking the appropriate steps to be able to do in a compliant way is, like we announced earlier, in providing custody. So kind of part of the puzzle and part of what we're solving is being able to provide custody through the broker-dealer of tokenized securities, as well as launch an ATS to support the secondary trading of these securities. So it's really is a long process to get the right approvals. You have to get your ATS accepted by the SEC. If you're a broker-dealer, you have to go through approval with FINRA. And then, of course, have a working project and then have enough demand, supply and demand, to be able to operate that platform. We think, with a great group of partners like we have, we're excited that, we're kind of staying on track as the best we can, kind of given the time it takes to get the feedback from the regulators, but that's really part of our vision. So it's all forward-looking, nothing that we're actually doing today.
So for Consensus Digital Securities, we are not applying for an ATS at the moment. We will, once we do primary issuance for our current transaction and any subsequent ones we do over the next 12 months, we'll be leveraging any liquidity through North Cap and the solutions they come up with their ATS.
We don't have any firm plans around an ATS or anything around in that nature. We do see kind of creating a secondary marketplace for LP interest in the alternative fund space to be a huge potential in the future. I think we're still quite a bit of ways on the adoption front, especially amongst some of the more established GPs. Like for example, on the hedge fund side, they're not at the point where they don't want their information public. The existing LPs, they very much have no desire to have their holdings made public on a blockchain. So I think this will kind of come from a new age and era of funds. It's going to be a long time before some of the established players even consider thinking about kind of creating these tokenized vehicles.
Yeah, and so for us, we have no plans to do an ATS, and when North's up and running, obviously we'd look to list our clients, point them in that direction. But there's Open Finance Network, T0, Templum. Talked with all.
I was waiting for someone to mention some other names. Okay, got it. So I don't get it. There's all this talk about ATSs, so much talk, and people saying they're trading, and I'm not under the impression of whether or not they're trading or not. But like, what would be the perfect vision? Like that you go to a provider, and that you could list it or have them be a custodian, or you would list it, and would you expect to have the demand for doing the transaction? Like in your, Lance, we'll come back this way, but like what would be the perfect solution for your firm with tokenized investments?
Well, I mean, I think the perfect solution is where there's dozens of ATSs or secondary exchanges worldwide, right? That in a perfect world would be like 0x or something to share their order book, and so you have basically global liquidity. And then, if you can get broker dealers on board to serve as market makers for securities, I mean, like that would be the most ideal situation. You have 24/7, 365 trading would be pretty cool. And then once again, leave it up to the consumer to choose where they want to. If they like North Capital's platform and that's where they want to go, then they can go there. Or I mean, that would be the perfect thing that I see.
Source code
Yeah.
used to transact in securities, connected to licensed broker-dealers.
Or even the air swap, like a decentralized thing would be, as they kind of are articulating, that sounds pretty cool.
Right.
But
Evan, you have any comments?
I'm aligned with Lance. I mean, we've had conversations with everyone he mentioned, Open Finance, Templum, Coinbase, everyone who's looking at potentially doing an ATS, and I honestly think that we're not really going to get there. I mean, if it's just so siloed into different ATSs, I just don't see us getting the liquidity that we necessarily need. I mean, if you're going to sign up for an ATS that's listing, in reality, in 8 months when the first one's actually unlocked to one token, maybe two, right? So if people are co-listing across different exchanges, you sign up for one, whichever interface you like the best, but you have access to a variety of different assets that are traded.
Got it. So one topic we skipped over, I just want to jump back into. Everyone in here, we're all business people. We all use a platform. We all want to basically make more money, right? Generate revenue. So in the scope of us talking about ATSs and security tokens and private placements, how has this newer world helped your business grow? Or some businesses are just emerging because of this technology. Specifically in relation to speaking to bringing on issuers or people that want to raise capital. Has this new world helped because of this digitization of private placements and potentially having an additional liquidity advantage in the future on an ATS that might not exist yet?
So for us, since we're not interfacing a lot directly with issuers, it's our platform partners who are having those conversations. I'll talk about our growth, which I would say has a lot to do with the Jobs Act, and then kind of what was quote unquote crowdfunding is now just how private placements are handled. Like now, if you have an investor 3 years ago that it was odd to be e-sign docs, now that's the expectation. You don't say e-sign, you just send the documents. So I think the kind of evolution in our space has obviously led to kind of a big change, even funds that wouldn't ever have a conversation and different real estate groups that would never consider a 506c offering. Now they're interested in that, and now they're interested in tokenizing their offering or trying to figure out some way to have liquidity. So I think from where we stand, today, no, we haven't seen growth, but I see what's happened with the crowdfunding space in 5 years to be what will be the tokenized space in 5 years. So it's a STO or an ICO. It's like this, and now it kind of has a bad, people, you say ICO and people stray away. And I think it won't be the STO space. I think it will just be how private markets are transacted.
I agree.
Yeah, I think for us, so we're an emerging company. So as far as like revenue growth, Consensus Digital Securities has been around for like 3 months, 4 months. So not much to talk about there. But I think one of the things we are seeing in this is what would be normally a company that's trying to raise capital in a private way through traditional VC is unsuccessful and would probably die, sees security tokens as this like, ooh, I failed going around Wall Street, now I can go and talk to Consensus and go get a bunch of security token deals done. And for some reason, no one thinks that we're just gonna call those VCs and be like, hey, we got this deal for you. So like that's one of the things we're seeing now is like a lot of these primary issuers are coming out of the, to us, seeing this as another option when in reality there's way more parallels and the demand is all coming from the same investors and high net worth individuals and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I think we haven't seen a huge conversion in terms of, I guess, dollars and cents, but I would say that it's growing. It basically opens up a new market for us to talk to on the GP and the LP side. So, for example, funds that they're newer funds, maybe they're blockchain-focused funds or crypto-focused funds. They're more open to using online platforms as a way to raise capital, and so it's kind of a natural fit. So I think we are getting a lot more conversations, specifically around GPs that are not even looking at traditional ways of raising capital. They're kind of just jumping directly to online methods. So I think we'll over time, as these become, as this asset class, I guess in general, becomes more advanced. It'll be a natural solution just to come directly to an online channel to raise capital.
Yeah, and we haven't seen any direct benefit from it yet. It's one of those things where, it's kind of, you got to kind of be a pioneer to go out and look and be part of this conversation. That's how I've kind of approached everything, right? Like I'm not a type of guy who's going to sit around and wait for it to be defined. It's like be part of it. So, we haven't seen anything yet.
So are there different segments of the market that each of you are seeing being more prevalent, whether it's VC, whether it's traditional hedge fund, whether it's real estate, whether it's fintech? Who's really coming to your organizations and say, for example, and this was way, I don't know if this is way off, maybe it's normal now, but I had an issuer that I guess makes certain games distribution for games on certain platforms and such, where it felt like his whole business made total sense until he said crypto, and I'm like, I don't understand. You have a business, it makes money, and I don't understand where you're trying to tie in crypto, and it just got confusing. But what businesses are coming in more or less, or what are you seeing in the marketplace as far as the emergence of people that are adapting to this technology?
Again, we see it more from deal groups than issuer specific, and it's been pretty equal across the board. What we haven't seen, other than working with dark matter, is funds. So we haven't had a lot of funds come and say that they're as interested, though we see that as being there a lot of potential. But real estate has been pretty significant, and obviously private equity.
For me personally, the deal flow we're seeing is a lot of funds doing exactly what these guys are trying to do, is tokenize LPs in the fund.
Yep. And then we're also starting to kind of more recently see hard assets like art or like rare wine, just like in a fund structure trying to tokenize like a specific art piece or a specific bottle of wine. And so that's kind of a very niche market, but we are starting to see people start thinking about kind of tokenizing everything, I guess.
Yeah, and for us, it's real estate. That's where we come from. And I just think that it's not surprising, given real estate guys are always looking for, they want the capital, and if they believe it could bring extra capital or more expediently, then they'll do it.
Right.
Of course, that's not how it works.
So what I didn't hear, which I want to hear, which is what we need for this market to continue to grow, is applications to be built on top of blockchain technology. And I think I heard it on an earlier panel that there really are no users of the new technology. I think there's a small universe of people that kind of know what's going on if they decided to learn it on their own. But I'm actually pretty excited that a lot of universities now and different programs, and even Consensus has a program I just signed up for. That wasn't purposely a plug, but I did sign up for,
Academy?
Yeah, I signed up for the Academy. What's the platform it's on? Coursera. There's a course on Coursera where for $99, 6 weeks, you can get a degree in something. Anyway. So, I mean, I'd like to see more applications that are raising money for capital. But before we get to our last question, which will be, where do you see the future? Which, actually, this might be a similar question. But what's missing? Like, this is an open-ended question from their perspective. What haven't we talked about, or what should we be talking about that's missing today in the emergence of security tokens and exchanges?
I think there's not the right infrastructure yet to support, like if you're saying, I don't think there's been kind of the marriage between regulations and the technology in a way that makes it make sense. Like everyone's still, in my opinion, trying to figure that out. Like we're trying to figure out like, okay, there's this great technology, there's this kind of difficult process and regulatory hurdles we have to go. How do we kind of marry the two in a way that is scalable? Right. So I think that's what's missing. Like it's not, in our experience, or in my experience rather, it hasn't been like, wow, that made that offering so much easier. You know, it's like we're still trying to kind of work out those kinks.
I'd say some sort of pedigree transaction. I mean, the majority of the stuff is like a lot of crypto-based funds tokenizing things. Like I'm talking like Empire State Building tokenizing a sliver of their value or something like or Fidelity coming in and doing something in the crypto or security token space. The pedigree level deal is what's missing.
Fidelity, but I've seen Goldman go in, go out, go in, go out. I mean, it's craziness.
Someone from the institutional world
has
to make a move.
Yeah, to make a move. What do you guys think's missing?
I agree with both Sarah and Evan. That's the lack of regulatory clarity. So, and that, I think it kind of drives there's no pedigree investments because there is no regulatory clarity. No one wants to do the first move. There's not a lot of advantage if you're already an established player. So you just kind of wait. And then it's just a combination of like back and forth waiting.
I think it's crypto custody. I mean, it's like I was with an investor group, and someone pitched some blockchain thing that the investment would have been some crypto, security token sort of thing, and they're just like, our investment mandate doesn't call for that. We can't hold that. What do we do with that? Right? Because
that's a good one.
Like it's the custody thing. It's just like
custody.
They had a place they could send it to. Then they're gonna be like, okay.
So we need custody from a big institution with a trophy property.
Yeah.
Right. We need all that.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I mean, what do you see? The final question. What do you see? I had 5 years out, but maybe that's too long. 2 years out. Like, what 5 years out? I mean, where is that similar question? But like, where do you think we're going to be? Do you think we'll have users of applications? Do you think we'll have custody? Do you think that token property, that trophy property exists?
Yeah, so I think we're close to solving the problem. Like I actually do think that there are a lot of really innovative players in the space working aggressively to solve this issue of custody of the assets, which then kind of helps solve the settlement issue, which is really, I think, at the core of secondary trading. So I think that's going to be solved, like in the next 2 years, hopefully much, much sooner. And I think there will be more players in this space, but I think, like I said earlier, I think once we get that solved, then it is just a matter of implementation like you would any of these other technologies. So I think what will be kind of this novel, a token offering will just be, this is like how we track our securities of an issuance. So that's, maybe I'm optimistic at 2 years, so I'll say for 5.
I thought you guys were going to have it solved in 90 days, but...
So I think, I don't want to steal from a previous panel, but lobbying is going to increase. We're already being invited to lobbying groups in DC, so I think we're going to see a lot of that going on. I also think we're going to see a lot of consolidation in the exchange space, not just the ATS, but the traditional crypto exchange space, because if we're going to see or want institutionals to participate in this, I don't think exchange technology today for crypto is is sufficient enough. I mean, we need to be able to do like high frequency trading and all that kind of stuff, and like Coinbase and all the other exchanges out there, I don't think can match those speeds. So some sort of consolidation and tech advancement in the exchange space as well.
So I have no idea what's going to happen in 2 years, but I think it's inevitable that all this stuff will come to fruition over time as kind of the key decision makers and all sorts of different institutions and governments roll over. I think there's, at this point, probably no way they naturally go back to the old way of doing things. So it could take a long time, but I think it's inevitable. More specific to security tokens, I guess, kind of viewed as opposed to utility tokens, I think as we, as you know, ICOs or capital raising through token issuances continue on, I think it's going to be more on the security token side. I think kind of the utility token model is going to be much less used to raise capital. So I think security tokens are kind of what I think will be sort of the future in terms of how we think about digital assets.
Well, I want to ask you a question on that because we have a few minutes. But so maybe utility token won't be used to raise capital, but let's just touch it for a second. Utility tokens, will that be bigger? Meaning, will there be people using these networks, and then will these networks have value? So you almost made it sound like it's going away.
I think on the ICO front, I think
not for fundraising.
Right.
For fundraising, I agree with you. They'll raise the capital they need to build the platform for the functionality.
Hopefully for equity in the
maybe
company.
Security tokens, but with the start, I still don't see how that's going to work in 2 years. I think it'll just be how it was, and then they'll launch, sell utility tokens to the people who are actually going to use them for the utility.
Sell them or give them.
Give them, sell them, whatever they need to do. But the point is, to people who are going to actually use the utility, right?
Right. So what are you 2 years out? So we
2 years out, I'm kind of with Sarah. I think that the custody will kind of be solved. Some of these things will be solved. The usability stuff will start to be there where people will be more comfortable, and I think I can't think the world will be.
I think we covered mostly. Didn't want to throw anything in at the end here. I don't think we're doing questions from the audience, but I'll take one.
It breaks the rules.
Any questions? We got a question about.
What do you think the regulators are going to do to destroy the recurring networks? How are they going to change in order to get in the way of it? Or do you think they'll just let it go and just try to keep up?
So what do we think regulators will do, or what changes do you think they'll make for the better or for the worse that could prevent the market to move forward or move backwards?
Look, the dream would be that this is a whole new level of efficiency for the transactional world and to sell hard assets and what have you. But right now, if you're selling security tokens, it really is a very streamlined way of doing what the SEC controls very tightly right now. And do you think they're going to let that happen, or try to, keep up, or get in the way of it? What do you think?
So do we think the SEC will get in the way of new technology, basically? I don't have to answer that question, but
I don't think the SEC will get in the way. I actually think that, what we've seen from them, and I was at Disrupt a couple weeks ago and got to hear from the lady that runs like the whole Pacific Northwest, San Francisco, and she echoed what Jay Clayton said and what all these guys are saying. So they're not trying to get in the way. They're trying to be part of the solution. So I don't see that. And I don't even, once again, I'm not even convinced that a lot of the rules need to change. I think that's
what I was thinking.
The number of, I think that 2,000 investors before you have to go public, I think that would be nice if that could be raised. I think that the accredited investor standards could be broadened so that pool, to me, those are the two changes that could be made that would really make this, especially with all the things we've been talking about today, a lot more interesting. And a more efficient market, and it would accomplish what Jay Clayton is speaking about with the Main Street investors. So I don't think they're going to get in the way.
Yeah, I would agree. And what we've seen in our interactions is I think they are very plugged in to what's going on. And in our conversations, the types of questions they were asking were extremely technical. They understood like what we were describing and what we want to do, there wasn't really much of a learning curve. It was clear that they understood the technology enough to completely understand what we were describing. And I think that there's pretty big consequences for whatever guidance that they give. I mean, what we've seen in this space with how fast things are moving, there, has to be some thought, because this is clearly something that is pretty significant and has big consequences for the common investor. I mean, there's a reason that private securities have been limited to people of a certain net worth, because they're considered so high risk. Now, a lot of assets are moving more private. There's a lot, real estate now is more accessible than what it was 10 years ago. So is there an argument to making it more widely acceptable and accessible? Absolutely. But I think that the SEC is really, from my observation, looking at this in a way that they can continue to make sure that there's oversight and to protect investors. But I mean, not to say I wouldn't love for things to move a little more quickly, but I understand, yeah.
Great, so I know we're between the bar and the next thing, so thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.